one of the things that the Port State measures, and one of the strengths of the Port State measures agreement, is that it's focusing attention on fishing activities and related activities on the high seas. So we all have strong inspection efforts of our domestic fleets, our national vessels, know what those vessels are doing within our own EEZs. But the Port State Measures Agreement also requires that the foreign flag vessels that are coming into your ports have harvested product or done or conducted fishing related activities in accordance with the resolutions and measures of the regional fisheries management organizations. So for our office, this was quite a learning curve that our inspectors and our officers had to start learning the regulations of those regional fisheries management organizations. And there are many. The resolution books can be up to 300 pages long. So it's really about figuring out what information do we as inspectors need to know. Because we'll talk about the different roles of these RFMOs. Because some of you are very familiar with these, and some of you less familiar. So we just wanted to cover what these bodies do, and then we're going to do an exercise to make it a little bit more interactive, okay? So I think either India or Singapore was highlighting this yesterday, but all of the different organizations that exist out there. And in the United States, we call this alphabet soup, because it's just letters and acronyms and letters, okay? But all of these acronyms represent some type of regional fisheries body. So it's a lot going on, okay? But we do tend to focus on the regional fisheries management organizations. But this is what it looks like on the high seas. These are all the regional entities that are playing roles in managing the fish stocks globally. For the RFMOs, we keep using that acronym, these are international governmental organizations. They coordinate efforts. A lot of it goes to managing the fisheries management side, managing the fish stocks. There are monitoring, control, and surveillance measures to combat IUU fishing. So there's many different components of these organizations. Some that are operational and some that are not. That's why these resolution books can be 300 pages long. So it's really about breaking down the information to what you as an inspector need to know. And yesterday in Brandon's presentation, he highlighted that what we've done is kind of consolidated and made guides for our inspectors for the Western Central Pacific Fisheries Commission, the Commission in the Southern Ocean, the ones that the United States sees most commonly, to provide a resource of, as an inspector, what do I need to check? Which of the recommendations apply to me? What should I be looking for on these foreign flag vessels? And this is something that's quite new to all of us. And it's been a big learning curve for our inspectors of the foreign flag fishing vessels as well. So ultimately their goals is long-term conservation and sustainable fisheries, which is also the goal of the Port State Measures Agreement and why we're all here, that economic livelihood, food security, the bigger issues that also come with, that we all address by combating IUU fishing. So for those not as familiar, some of these regional, oh, that color didn't come up, sorry guys. It's pretty faint, but you have different regional fisheries management organizations. They're basically set up two different ways. There are some that in this case manage all of the main fisheries of that geographical region. So Brendan's presentation and case studies, Todd's case studies that he's presented focused on the Bandit 6 with the NECA and the STS-50 we're looking at the major 8. Okay, those are all in CAMLR, which is the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources. So what's going on in the Southern Ocean? Mostly krill and toothfish, a very highly valuable species, highly regulated. And that ties back into Joelle's presentation on risk assessment. If you have a high value species that's heavily regulated, that's a higher risk of IUU than a species that's very common and not regulated at all, low value. You have, sorry, I'm just geographically orienting myself. Indian Ocean Tuna Commission, okay? Another, it's regional based, okay? That would be relevant to this area, and of course there's other on the map. Then you have the regional fisheries management organizations that are focusing on specific fisheries. So we call these the big 5. These are the big tuna 5. These are the ones that are focused on tuna and tuna-like fisheries. So billfish, marlin. Most of these have provisions related to sharks, prohibited species, sea turtle mitigation gear requirements, okay? So basically you have ones that are geographically focused and then some that might be species focused. So that's what we're looking at when we're talking about all of these. So as I said, the role of the RFMOs can be twofold. You have your monitoring, control, and surveillance measures, MCS. These are the operational things we are concerned about. What inspectors need to know when they're looking at foreign flag vessels and when you're making sure that fish hasn't been harvested in contravention of these requirements. Or Thailand, I'm going to choose them just because I know they get so many carrier vessels, that the foreign flag vessels they're receiving, the carrier vessels, have followed the transshipment requirements. Okay, so this is the side of the RFMOs we as practitioners focus on versus kind of more the sciencey side. But there are other issues such as fish aggregating device closures. Okay, that's really important for an inspector to know whether or not that there's closure areas. Is there a specific geographic pocket? Okay, this can be a lot of information. Okay, you all already have to know each of your country's national regulations, yes? You have to know your fisheries regulations. Have your domestic vessels comply with your national regulations? And then with the Port State Measures Agreement, we also need to be aware of what's happening on the high seas and those regulations. It can be so much information. I'm a policy person, so I work a lot with regulations, and it's not my favorite thing to do. I will admit that, okay? I understand it. So what we want to do in this exercise is show how you can break it down into, I hope this translates, but in English we would say bite-sized pieces, okay? Just the things you should know. In your school, go back to when you were young, in math class. Todd's already picked on me. Math is not my strength, okay? Do you guys ever encounter word problems? The math problems that were a paragraph long and you really only needed one sentence to be able to do the equation? Do you guys remember those? Have you had that experience? Well, that's what I feel like regulations are. They're these huge word problems with lots of legal text that you really just need to know. What is it you as the inspector need to know? And that's what we want to do in this exercise. We want to break down these regulations into what we call, or how we train our inspectors, as the elements of a violation. Okay? So you have these regulations, and I just went over the goal, but there it is. So you have these regulations, and they can be pages and pages and pages long. What is it we need to check? What is it we need to know to determine if there's a violation? And all of this can be summarized as, what are the facts? So we're hoping that this exercise will not only help you with learning how to understand these RFMO measures, but also you can apply it to your national laws and regulations. They're the same. One's within your EEZ, one's on the high seas. Okay, so you just want to break it down a bit. So what are the facts? Something that truly exists or happens. Was their VMS on or off? Did they transmit VMS, yes or no? Okay. Did they have a prohibited species on board? Many of the RFMOs have a list of prohibited species. Did it exist, did it not? Did you find it or not? Do they have their logbooks on board, yes or no? Okay, these are all the things that we're checking, and Thailand introduced, and some of the things Brandon was talking about yesterday, trying to bring it all together. What are not facts? Well, your opinion, okay? Your belief or your judgment, that's not going to work in courts, okay? Does it apply to the regulation, yes or no? Okay. I believe they may have had this on board, no. Do you have a picture of it? Did it exist? Okay, does that make sense? All right, so let's look at one of these. It's your who, what, where, when, and why. So who was the person? Which vessel engaged in the activity? What flag states are you dealing with? What nationality of the vessel master? That comes important with some of the reporting. Your crew information. What illegal activity did the vessel engage in? Okay. What facts do you have to show and or prove, depending on how your laws are written and what word to use, that show that vessel engaged in that activity? What are your facts? Okay. What was, and when, very important, when? Okay. Oh, I think this vessel engaged in IU fishing last week. How do you know that? Why do you know that? Is there a gap in the logbooks? Did they turn off their VMS? Okay. What is the evidence that shows you that this activity happened? And then Brendan's going to cover evidence later. Where? Okay, so who was engaged? What happened? When did it happen? Where did it happen? And how did they conduct the illegal activity? Was it illegal gear? Were they using a high seas draft net? Did they harvest a prohibited species? Did they go over quota? Did they turn off their VMS and lie about their positions? Okay, all of these different things that we've been talking about over the course of the week. Now we're going to get into how does that apply, okay? If you don't have these basic facts, then you likely need to do more of an investigation. And that's why we've been talking about so far, and especially in Brandon's presentation yesterday on boarding and inspections, photograph everything. Because once you leave that boat, that vessel, if it leaves port, you don't get to go back and ask more questions. So you want to document as much as possible so that after you're off the vessel, you have the information you can review, okay? And start investigations. Maybe you need to go get off the vessel. We do not expect everybody in this room to be experts on regional fisheries management measures. There are far too many. Knowing where to go after you get off that vessel, oh, this seemed wrong, now I need to go check WCPFC. Now I need to go check the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission. I need to investigate these pieces, and having those photographs will help you. So before you can determine if, in this case, NR means national regulation, CMM is the conservation management measure, that is the term WCPFC uses. Some RFMOs call them resolutions, some just call them measures, they're all the same thing, they're the regulations at the end of the day. So before you can determine if one's been violated, you have to know what constitutes the violation, okay? So this is how we break down the elements. So I'm going to use the Western Central Pacific Fisheries Commission as an example, okay, for the group for today. If you're not familiar with these resolutions, and similar to yesterday, we can do demonstrations. They have a table of contents that list basically all of the measures. Some regional fishery management organizations have a numbering system with a year. I find this very helpful because you know if it's the most recent or not. You can see what's passed in 2018, 2019. Some use just a year and a number. Some just have a numbering system. Unfortunately, each RFMO does things a little differently. But you'll have the number. This is essentially your regulation number. You have the title of that regulation, and thank goodness, these are typically linked, so I can click on that one and it'll take me to the page, which I find very helpful. So this is a Western Central Pacific example. Also very helpful to help with this alphabet soup, most all RFMOs have a glossary of all of the acronyms. So this is a really good place. When I first started my job, I started keeping a list of each one of these that I heard and defining them because there were so many. So they do have, within the, just like we talked about, the Port State Measures Agreement can be a very strong reference tool for those that are not party. There's a lot of good information in the regional fisheries management organizations too. So that explains some of these components. And we've developed a list of acronyms for their inspectors, for our inspectors, because this was all, a lot of it was new information too with PSMA. So this is an example of a conservation management measure, so I took some old ones. Typically the definitions are good to know, okay? How are things being defined? In many of your countries, I suspect this will come up to your attorneys or prosecutors. But as an inspector, in order to figure out if something was done, if there's a violation, you need to know how that RFMO is defining things. What does this word mean in that area? Because they can differ a little bit. Any questions so far before we get to the exercise? Because we're going to look next at a conservation measure and management measure, because I'm talking about WCPFC. And we're going to highlight, we're going to start going through the violations, the elements of violation. So let's look at one. So we're going to examine, we're going to compare a set of facts. We're going to pretend that we just did a boarding. Unfortunately, in a 1-week course, we don't have time to do a boarding for each one of our presentations. In our 8-day course, we typically would do this presentation and then go on a boat. We don't have time. So we're going to pretend that we just boarded a vessel, we looked at the logbooks, we interviewed the crew, and now we're going to see if there was a violation and determine if we need to investigate things more. So this is an example of what it looks like. If you have never seen one of these, again, this is essentially a regulation for the high seas at the end of the day. This may not be current, it might have been updated, so this is just an example purpose. It may not be the most current. So it gets a background information. There's a lot of information at the beginning that's like, we, the commission, think this is very important and this is why. We don't need to know that. We need to get into what are the actual regulations. I am not going to read this whole thing, okay? Nor do I expect you to. I'm just highlighting that these become very, very long. What we're dealing with here in terms of the, oh, it doesn't say. What we're dealing with here is electronic logbooks, okay? So actually, I don't like the pointer. So it has a lot of text. And unfortunately, many of the RFMOs do not translate their conservation measures. Many of them are only in English. It's up to your home countries to have to translate them, which understandably is very difficult too. So out of all of this, we need to know that basically this RFMO is requiring that the master of the vessel, flying its flag, lots of words we don't need, the master of the vessel completes a written or electronic logbook. Out of all of this, that's really what you need to know. Okay? When we're looking at this. The who is the master of the vessel. The what is completion of a logbook. The how, written or electronic. The where, on the vessel. Okay? And the why would be the very long introduction to this paragraph of why it's important. Okay? But you're going to see in this example, this goes on and on, several paragraphs. Okay? You on the vessel don't need to know all of this text and all the requirements. What you as inspectors need to know is this exists. You know, if you get a foreign flag vessel that fish in WCPFC waters, it needs to have a logbook. That's what you need to know. And then, if you think there's an issue with the logbook, you can go back after you get off the vessel, look up this very long requirement, and review whether or not there's a violation. Okay? So a lot of it's just breaking this down. And that's why we've created guides for our inspectors on what are the major measures that the inspectors need to be aware of. Okay? And then they can go back and read the entire text, just like you do with your national regulations. You know that there's fisheries, you know there's closed areas, okay? And then you can go back to the actual legislation if you need to. So let's do an exercise. We're going to compare, I'm going to give you a situation. We're going to compare the facts of what you found on your boarding. We're all going to pretend that we boarded a vessel. And we're going to compare them against the facts of the conservation measure for WCPFC. So here we go. I'm going to read it just for translation purposes, slowly. So we've inspected during your inspection of the boarded vessel, you examined the vessel's written log and noted the following. So he has a written log, he or she, most likely he, but he or she has a written logbook. Is that okay? Based on the regulation? Yes. Written or electronic? So good, we have a logbook. We know we needed a logbook, we have a logbook, we reviewed the logbook. This is what we found. The vessel fished for 25 days. In this case, it's going to be WCPFC. When we say the convention area, that just means it fished in WCPFC waters. Most of these texts will call it the convention area, and that's just the waters of that RFMO. Okay? Longline gear was used. How did they fish? Longline. Okay? The effort and catch. So effort means they could have been fishing and get no fish. They could have set the lines for more than one day. That's what effort is. We're only documented for 17 days. The remaining 8 days did not have any documentation of the vessel's activity. Okay? This is what you found when you inspected the vessel. It's okay. So, was the vessel on the high seas of the convention area, or was it in your EEZ? Okay, high seas in the convention area. for this example, we're in Western Central Pacific waters somewhere. So yes, correct. Everybody got that? Okay. Was the vessel engaged in fishing activity? What kind? So, new point, in the long resolutions of RFMOs, there will be different measures for different fisheries. So, there are measures, in WCP, this example specifically, they have measures for transshipment, they have measures for purse seine vessels, specific regulations for purse seines, specific regulations for longline vessels, and so on. So at that point, you would be flagging, I have a longline vessel, I need to make sure I look at the longline vessel resolution, or measures, okay? We're not going to do all of that today because this would go on forever. But I'm just highlighting where you can find the information and next steps. So yes, the vessel engaged in fishing, and we know it was a longline vessel, okay? Do we know if the vessel fished all 25 days? So the logbook noted that the vessel fished for 25 days. What's wrong, or what is an indicator, as Todd uses, of something that we might suspect here? Is there any indication something's not right? Exactly. Thank you, Indonesia and Cambodia. 8 days, we have no idea what they were doing. Right? So they fished for 25, they documented it for 7. What were they doing here? What were they doing? So, if you're looking at the logbooks, and Todd's going to talk about information analysis, I'm setting this up for him, you only know what they did for 17 days. So automatically, we start to think, okay, they said 25, 17 days are in the logbook, there's something missing here. Does that automatically mean there's IUU? Not necessarily. But what it does mean is that you need to dig deeper, okay? So a lot of times we talk about boarding checklists, and they're very good for doing routines, so that you always do your inspection the same way, you don't miss things, but you can't say, I check the logbooks, check, because you're going to miss something like this, okay? You got to dig deeper. So we're going to think about that. What didn't they report? Were logs entered for each day the vessel engaged in fishing? Based on your inspection. Did they record every single day their activity? Thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no. No, we're still missing, they were missing that 8 days.
Please repeat this one. I'm kind of catching on.
Yeah.
Please.
Were logs entered for each day the vessel engaged in fishing activities? So we have a logbook, that's good. The vessel says, maybe the crew told you they fished for 25 days. The logbook only told you there were activities for 17 days. So we have a missing 8 days. So did the vessel record its activities for every day it fished? No. We're still dealing with this missing 8 days. Yeah? Thank you. We think we have a logbook. It did 17 days. Next slide. But interviews with the fish master, the crew, they may tell you something differently. We do have documentation for those 17 days, but we need to figure out what happened that missing 8. See how all this comes together?
So it can be no weekly.
Oops, sorry, I didn't hear that.
It can be no weekly.
It could be. We won't know until we follow up on that. Okay? Oh, sorry. So if we look back to the measure, it's okay, because I'm gonna skip back. So if we look back to the measure, okay, we found, I hit the wrong button, sorry. We found out on the vessel that there were 17 days in the logbook. We interviewed the crew and the master. They may have given us the information for 25 days. So now we need to go back to the regulation and see if there was a violation. Okay? Yeah, there you go. So, again, you don't have to have this whole thing memorized. You just need to know that they exist and go back to them. So in order to figure out if there's a violation, under WCPSC, you have to have an electronic logbook for every day it spends on the high seas. Days with fishing operations. So there's specific requirements if the vessel is fishing. Okay? There's special requirement if it's a purse-seine vessel. In this case, we have a long line, so we don't have to look at that part. If there's no fishing operations, but there's fishing effort, those are supposed to be recorded. So I heard it from Malaysia. They should be recording if they were searching for the fishing grounds. That comes under that effort category. If they were deploying or retrieving a fish aggregating device, provided it was legal. Were they deploying gear? Okay, so for days with no fishing operations, no fishing effort, the activity of the day must be entered. So, no matter if that vessel was fishing or not, they have to have something recorded. So, we know that the vessel was on the high seas for 25 days. It left port, it came back 25 days later. Their logbook said 17 days. Okay? So, in this case, were logs entered for each day the vessel was engaged in fishing? Maybe. Maybe they only fished for 17 days. That could be true. We don't know what they did these 8 days yet. That's why you need to go interview the captain. Captain, what happened here? What were you doing? Talk to the crew. Somebody brought up the engine logs for purse-seine vessels yesterday to see if gear was deployed. So that's when we have to dig deeper. So were logs entered for each fishing day? Maybe. They did record activities for 17 days. We don't know what they did those other 8 days. So, were the logs entered for the days the vessel was not engaged in fishing? No. We just looked at the regulation, and it said if they weren't fishing, the main activity had to be recorded. So ultimately, what this means is in the logbook, there should have been an entry for every single day, regardless if the vessel was fishing. Okay? So it's taking the pieces and breaking it down into what information do you, the inspector, need to know about the regulation, and comparing that with what you found. Okay, so we call these the elements of a violation. Okay? So what should have been entered for those 8 missing days? Whatever that activity was. They could have been resting. They could have been drifting, waiting to enter port. Okay? They could have been waiting for the AREP to be approved. But that needed to be noted. Okay? So, you're on board this vessel. You've conducted your inspection. Did that vessel master maintain an accurate copy of the required information for his fishing trip? Is the logbook accurate? Is it correct? No, it's not. Okay? So were logs entered for each day the vessel did not engage in fishing? No, we have a missing 8 days. They could have been fishing, and now we have unreported catch. They could have been drifting, resting, other things. That's when you have to dig deeper. You should have recorded the main activity, regardless if they were fishing. So now you have a violation that the logbook was not maintained correctly. So is enforcement action or further investigation needed? So what do we need to investigate? The missing 8 days. Can you take law enforcement action at this point? Depends. It depends on your national law. Okay? In most cases, and with port-state measures agreement violations, if it's a violation of the RFMO, whose responsibility is it to take law enforcement action? Does anybody know who is supposed to take the law enforcement? The flag state. I heard it from back there. The flag state is responsible. So unless we're in Thailand. So unless Thailand had a regulation on logbooks, there may not have been we keep talking about this, there may not have been a violation of Thailand law. But you would complete this information on the inspection report. We're going to talk about that later today. You would note the regional fisheries management, you would say there was a violation of WCPFC and the resolution, and that would be reported back to the flag state. And we'll talk about that more with PSMA. But does that help break some of these regulations that can be pages long down? Everybody kind of understand and are more aware of the roles of the regional fisheries management organizations. So these are kind of the main ones that are relevant of inspectors. Many RFMOs have port inspection schemes. They could be in the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission. It's the Port State Measures Agreement. So if you're a member, if your country is party to the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission, you should be following Port State Measures Agreement, okay, because of their inspection scheme. WCPFC, it's a little bit different. It's getting, all of the RFMOs are working closer and closer to the Port State Measures Agreement. But there's different restrictions, BMS requirements, okay, so just knowing that these are out there and how to get the information. Any questions? That's all I really had. It was just to break this down, the elements of violation down. Any questions? Helpful? Not helpful? Oh, Joao has a comment or question.
Is actually a comment, and it's very important to understand that quite often the same geographical area has more than one RFMO.
Yes.
Because quite often they relate to species. So in the case of NEAF, there is NEAF, which basically manages all species except species that are managed by someone else. So that's what the convention says. Which means that for tunas there is ICAT, which is North and South Atlantic. There is a specific RFMO for salmon in both sides of the North Atlantic, NASCO. There is one for marine mammals in the same area. It's NUMCO, it's probably not there. And of course, on the other side of the 42, there is nothing. It's not the same geographical area, but we share the same stocks. So quite often it can be tricky, because other than the area where the vessel was fishing, you have to pay attention for the species. Because it can have, especially cargo vessels, vessels that receive transshipment from fishing vessels, they may have to comply with different rules. If a cargo vessel has tuna and squid, for instance, they are under two different regulations. Or sorry, squid is a bad example. Horse mackerel from the South Pacific RFMO. So, and of course, if there is two fish on board, then it becomes also a CAMLAR issue. So you have to be aware that quite often, and this is particularly important for the reefer vessels, you may have to deal with different RFMOs in the same landing. So basically, the fish they have on board comes from three different, or the same geographical area, but they may have to comply with different rules.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, thank you.